Zheng Gui crossed over and became a Buddhist monk with extremely poor qualifications in the extraordinary world, relying on his golden fingers to traverse the vast world and embark on an extraordinary journey of 3,000 miles. Since my aptitude and intelligence cannot match those of a demon genius, I have no choice but to persevere. Keywords of the novel. Starting from the Vajra of Buddhism, crossing the heavens without a pop-up window, starting from the Vajra of Buddhism, crossing the heavens. Download the complete set of TXT, starting from the Vajra of Buddhism, crossing the heavens. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. Shami. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Shami. The towering mountains stretch endlessly, with overlapping peaks and emerald peaks rising into the clouds. The peaks introduced into the mist are like portraits of people, dancing gracefully, standing independently with arms outstretched, sitting cross-legged, or standing together. This is the Immortal Mountain, also called Luohan Mountain, which is one of the 10 famous mountains in the south of the Yangtze River during the Wei dynasty. Due to the hundreds of peaks and thousands of peculiar stones on this mountain resembling human figures, many even resemble Buddhist monks practicing meditation and practicing Taoism, leading to the construction of Taoist temples. As a result, many Buddhist and Taoist experts came to build Taoist temples. Later, with the rise of war and the proliferation of demons, martial arts and Buddhist sects gained more and more status. Later, as the Great Wei dynasty believed in Buddhism, the Confucian academies declined, and the Taoist temples were not famous. Today, there are only 3 or 2 Taoist academies on the huge Luohan Mountain, and the largest sect is the Mahavira temple that occupies the Voga peak. On the mountain peak 4 or 5 miles behind the Daxiong Zen temple, a little monk wearing a grey cloth robe stared and panted heavily, walking out of the dense forest 3 times in a row. He had a stack of firewood that was much wider than his body on his thin shoulder and back, with a firewood knife hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was the monk who cut firewood in the temple. After walking for a while, Zheng Gui felt sore all over. He gritted his teeth and walked to a blue stone to put down the firewood on his body. Only then did he take a deep breath and reached out to rub his sore shoulders. Master Jingxiu of Gouri, who doesn't care about the young master's age, actually asked me to fetch 200 pounds of firewood dog day. I can't bear 40 to 50 pounds. How can I finish it? Isn't this just bullying people? After muttering a few curses in a low voice, Zheng Gui reached out and wiped the sweat off his face. At the same time, he couldn't help but touch his shiny head again and sighed, "Why did you wake up and become a little monk?" This time traveling really caught people off guard. Originally, Zheng Gui was not a native of this world. He was originally a hardworking worker. He was punished for not achieving the quarterly KPI and went mountain climbing, possibly due to working overtime all year round, which resulted in his body being in a sub-healthy state. After gritting his teeth and climbing the peak, he fainted in front of his eyes. When he woke up, he found himself in a temple, becoming a 13 or 14-year-old novice. Zheng Gui was confused and at a loss, so he was scolded by a chubby monk and sent to the back mountain to chop firewood. From rebirth to now, Zheng Gui has chopped dozens of pounds of firewood, and after bending his fingers and calculating, it has only been 2 or 3 hours. However, perhaps it was the young mind of the little monk who helped Zheng Gui. He quickly accepted the remaining memories of the little monk, gained a basic understanding of the world, and also realized that he was likely unconscious and his soul was piercing through. Xiao Shami lost his loved ones due to a plague since childhood, and was later sent to Daxiong Zen Temple to grow up at the age of 5 or 6. Every year, the Daxiong Temple accepts children with innocent backgrounds and healthy bodies to go up the mountain. They also teach writing and meditation breathing techniques to supplement their disciples. If they encounter those with good qualifications, they will be accepted as true disciples, teaching Buddhism and martial arts. If they cannot be made, they will be sent to the miscellaneous service hall to work as gray-clothed monks and do odd jobs all day long. Zheng Gui's predecessor was unable to be selected as a martial monk at the age of 7 due to his lack of basic skills and abilities, and could only be assigned to work as a laborer. Because there was no master and he was young, he still lived in a small temple, so his knowledge was shallow, and the remaining memories were just basic information for Zheng Gui. For example, nowadays the Great Wei dynasty governs the world, and there are not only martial arts experts, but also demons, ghosts, and immortals and experts in the world. The Daxiong Zen temple where I am located is a major sect in Jiangnan, a holy land of Buddhism. The senior monks in the temple are all great figures with exquisite Buddhist teachings and profound martial arts skills. Zheng Gui knew that Shami had grown up at Daxiong Zen temple since childhood and had limited knowledge. He was not sure what kind of Buddhist holy land or martial arts school Daxiong Zen temple was. However, recalling the martial arts scenes he had seen his senior brothers weaving and jumping in the mountains and forests, punching and breaking a big tree with a bull mouth, he could still conclude that this world was a world with extraordinary power, and the Daxiong Zen temple he was in was a school with a high level of martial arts inheritance. Thinking of the legendary immortals and bodhisattvas, as well as those highly skilled predecessors, Zheng Gui was extremely excited and couldn't help but fantasize about his successful cultivation. But recalling his extremely poor aptitude and the experience of not being included as a disciple of a martial monk in the temple, Zheng Gui couldn't help but sigh with sadness in his heart. However, Zheng Gui did not lose hope. He tried many methods while chopping firewood, hoping to find the golden finger. But after working hard for a long time, Zheng Gui did not realize that he was pregnant with golden fingers or a system, which made him quite disappointed. He knew that for now, he could only rely on his own planning. Thinking about being in a world full of martial arts experts and monsters, and being a lowly and inexperienced laborer, without the help of the golden finger, I would probably never be able to become a martial monk for a lifetime, let alone aspire to immortality. However, Zheng Gui is not a person who accepts defeat. He is well aware of his meticulous thinking and systematic knowledge. He is not the naive and ignorant child of his predecessor. As long as he has the opportunity to learn martial arts and works hard to plan, he can still practice. Even if his foundation is poor and his practice is slow, he is always unwilling to try. Although he had only been in this world for a few hours, Zheng Gui was already prepared to secretly learn the martial arts of the temple and had made a plan. As miscellaneous monks, each shaman is assigned to the sutra pavilion every 1 or 2 months to guard and sweep the scriptures for the rest of the month. This rotation system is to prevent miscellaneous monks from living in the sutra pavilion for a long time, understanding and stealing the divine skills in the scriptures. Although most miscellaneous monks and shamans are semi-illiterate, let alone unable to read classical Chinese, this is enough to ensure that they do not understand the scriptures, but necessary precautions are still essential. Zheng Gui's hope of self-learning martial arts was put on the opportunity to guard the sutra pavilion. He calculated the time and knew that 10 days later would be his duty day, so he secretly rubbed his hands and imagined it. After resting and pondering for a while, Zheng Gui sat up suddenly and said, "It's noon. It's time to go eat. If you delay, you'll be starving." As he spoke, Zheng Gui quickly picked up the firewood and walked along a familiar and unfamiliar mountain road towards the towering Daxiong Zen temple, half hidden in the mountains and half shining in the sunlight. Returning to the miscellaneous yard, the Chaitu Jingxu monk in charge of firewood affairs was reprimanding several shamans who had returned from chopping firewood, while directing the others to chop and transport the firewood. Seeing Zheng Gui admitted to the hospital, he immediately stared and cursed with his stomach protruding, "You're so lazy. Why are you so lazy? You only came back after 3 strokes of the sun, and you've only beaten so much firewood." Zheng Gui dared not argue, just put down the firewood and lowered his head to listen to the training. After cursing for a while, Jingxu saw Zheng Gui bowing his head and not saying a word, feeling bored. He snorted coldly and said, "You guys are really despicable for being sneaky and slippery. I am the head of the stick appointed by Master Huimeng of the Zhangyuan Academy, and I always do things carefully. If you dare to act like this under my nose, you must punish me severely. After a moment of contemplation, Jingxiu and Shankai glanced at Zheng Gui and several other trembling little monks and grinned. You are not allowed to have lunch today. You are responsible for tidying up all the firewood in this yard. If you don't tidy it up well during evening class, you can't go for dinner either. Zheng Gui was already starving and thirsty, and couldn't help but argue a few words upon hearing this. However, remembering his identity and the world he lived in, he swallowed his saliva and moistened his throat. Following the other 3 senior disciples, he agreed, "Yes, Master Jingxiu." Monk Jingxiu, who was over 30 years old, only achieved the 3rd level of bone forging in martial arts. Due to his poor cultivation and deteriorating mental state, he was sent to the miscellaneous service hall for training. However, he did not reflect on himself and only vented his anger on the disciples of the shaman. Over time, none of the disciples in the miscellaneous service hall were afraid of him. Seeing everyone obediently bowing their brows and eyes, Jingxiu finally laughed heartily, feeling that his martial arts skills were not perfect, but he was also considered majestic in the miscellaneous service courtyard. He then proudly turned his back and headed towards Xiangji kitchen. Not long after Master Jingxiu left, the monks working in the Chaiyuan also dispersed. When they left politely, they would greet Zheng Gui and quickly leave without looking at him. They were either afraid of delaying their meal or afraid of getting close to Zheng Gui and being punished by the eccentric Master Jingxiu. Zheng Gui had just been reborn and didn't want to talk to his fellow disciples. He didn't want to waste time, and he was worried that his words and actions would be different from usual, causing criticism and trouble. At this moment, seeing that his disciples had dispersed, he breathed a sigh of relief and stepped forward to pick up his firewood knife and start chopping wood. Zheng Gui recognized the 3 shamans who were punished for chopping firewood together. He knew that 2 of them were named Zheng and Lu Su. They were also of similar age to Zheng Gui, with the same emaciated and short stature, yellow-faced and thin-skinned, and dark skin. Watching the 3 little shamans in constant fear, Zheng Gui let out a deep sigh in his heart and thought, if my predecessor had looked like this too. From his appearance, Zheng Gui was indeed similar to the 3 novices, but the difference was that Zheng Gui's eyes were a bit bright and he had more goals, while the 3 novices were still confused and ignorant. After a while, seeing that senior brother Xing had already started chopping firewood in an orderly manner, organizing and stacking them, the 3 little monks seemed to have a backbone. They consciously walked behind Zheng Gui and began to get busy. Bang! Click! The sound of chopping firewood echoed one after another in the firewood yard, like the horn of a laborer, although not pleasant, full of power. By the time all the firewood was chopped and stacked, it was already dark. Zheng Gui and Liao Ming were all sweating profusely and exhausted. During this period, Jingxiu also visited 3 times. After the final inspection, he waved his hand and said, "Indeed, they are all tight-skinned guys. Aren't they quick to work after a meal of hunger? Let's step back." Zheng Gui and his 4 companions bowed together as if granted amnesty, without even bothering to wipe their hands and faces, and headed towards Xiangji kitchen. At this point, the evening meal had come to an end, and when the 4 of them arrived at the Xiangji kitchen, there were not many monks and food left. However, they were extremely thirsty and didn't pay attention to the details. After serving the rice and vegetables, they wolfed them down. After finishing his meal, Zheng Gui didn't feel anxious in his heart. He carefully washed the dishes and put them away before bowing and thanking his senior brother in the kitchen, and then turned to the side room where he lived to rest. Within the Daxiong Zen temple, there are also 3 meals a day, especially for martial arts practitioners, miscellaneous monks, and pyrotechnic masters. Due to the energy required, even 1 meal is indispensable. However, if the high monks in the temple have achieved success in their cultivation, they will change to only eat 2 meals a day, morning and noon. If they are closed, they will eat 1 meal a day or even 3 meals a day. This reflects the deep cultivation of their martial arts and the introverted essence, with very little leakage. When Zheng Gui was growing up, he not only failed to cultivate his martial arts skills, but also had to work all day long. Naturally, he couldn't be hungry. He had eaten 3 bowls of rice to barely get enough and was willing to eat again. However, the rice bowl was already empty, so he had to turn back to his room to rest, thinking that he could use less energy and avoid waking up hungry in the middle of the night. The miscellaneous monk lived in a wing room with more than 10 people, and Zheng Gui couldn't help but be vulgar. Although he knew that his predecessor had several good relationship monks, he was too lazy to deal with them. When he returned to his room, he covered his head on his own bed and slept soundly. Some of the young monks wanted to talk to him, but when they saw sleeping incense, they gave up. Time is always the fastest in busy times. 10 days are just a flash. Zheng Gui has been very quiet for 10 days. Except that he followed his elder martial brothers to read scriptures in the Sakyamuni hall in the morning to do morning classes, he spent the rest of his time cutting firewood and carrying water, carrying dung and watering vegetables. He is busy every day. This monotonous life soon made Zheng Gui unbearable. Fortunately, at the beginning of the month, Zheng Gui knew that he should go to the Sutra Pavilion to be on duty, so he got up early in the morning to wash, and then came to the Sakyamuni hall early to wait for early classes. Carved beams and painted rafters in the tall palace, the Buddha's golden body looks more and more sacred and tall under the service of Buddha's disciples. Zheng Gui's identity was naturally not close to the inside of the hall. He lay on the side door, watching the flickering candlelight in the dimly lit hall. After a moment, monks came one after another. After the heads of each courtyard counted their disciples, they reported those who missed classes for no reason to the monks in charge of the precepts hall. Then, the monks began reciting scriptures under the guidance of several heads. If there are sentient beings who have come from countless tribulations, all minor and serious sins and obstacles, from past lives, without repentance. If one can read, recite, and write this mantra. If it accumulates karma, it will still dissolve snow like soup. Soon they will all realize the concept of no life and endurance. Therefore, the Tathagata declares this mantra in the future, protecting beginners and practitioners. Entering the Samadhi. Being calm both physically and mentally. Achieving great peace and seclusion. And having no demons, ghosts, or gods. And having no origin, injustice, or suffering. Old karma, debts. Coming to cause trouble. Zheng Gui was originally an atheist, but upon entering this realm, he began to have faith in the gods and Buddhas. Therefore, although he was not allowed to read Buddhist scriptures, he did not dare to neglect morning classes every day. As time went on, he felt that he would always have peace of mind and no more troubles during his studies. Half an hour passed in the blink of an eye. At this moment, half a round of sun rose from the eastern sky, and the morning sun shone through the branches and leaves, through the window frames, and into the main hall. It happened to shine brightly on the golden body of the Buddha, appearing bright and magnificent, holy and magnificent. With the final vows of the disciples seeking the Dharma and faith coming to an end, the morning classes have also come to an end. The monks stood up and bowed to the heads, while the heads walked away before the monks dispersed. Until the first leader of Bodhi Hall, Arhat Hall, and Discipline Hall and the master of the prison temple leave, they will finally become the monks of the worker hall. Zheng Gui knew he was going to the Sutra Pavilion, so he stood still. After a moment, the monks in front of the temple dispersed, and Master Huimeng, the head of the miscellaneous service courtyard, twisted his beard and looked at Zheng Gui and the other 2 monks, saying, "Today is the day you 3 go to the Sutra Pavilion to be on duty. Please note that the Sutra Pavilion is the top priority of this temple and should not be careless." Master Huimeng is an old monk with a short stature. He has a grayish beard and is dressed in a yellow monk robe, silently instructing Zheng Gui and the 3 of them. Zheng Gui and others naturally agreed without hesitation. After a while, Master Huimeng turned to his side and said, "If you and anyone go to the Sutra Pavilion for the first time, I will personally take you to hand it over." As Huimeng spoke, he turned around to lead the way, with Zheng Gui and 2 monks, Fan and Lushi, following closely behind. A moment later, the 4 people arrived at the Sutra Pavilion, the 6th entrance to the Buddhist temple. This place is adjacent to the abbot's room in front of it, and next to the Arhat hall, where the monks of the temple gather. It can be said that it is the heart of the round guard. Upon entering the Sutra Pavilion, there were disciples on duty who saluted, and then the old monk in yellow came out to speak to Huimeng, who was in charge of this place. Huimeng asked the old monk to arrange for Zheng Gui and his 3 companions. After the 3 monks entered the cabinet under the guidance of a martial monk, Huimeng smiled and took out a yellowed book from his sleeve, handing it to the old monk. He said, "Senior brother Huidun, I have mastered the Lingye hand and now I am here to exchange it for the great Lingye hand's secret scripture." The old monk took the secret script and flipped through it, saying, "Junior brother, your aptitude is indeed impressive. I have been practicing Lingye hands for over 7 months, but I spent more than 10 months practicing to become a fool back then." Zheng Gui dared not turn back to look, and Yu Guangzhong only saw these things. If he wanted to hear more, he had already gone far, and he didn't know what the 2 monks would say later. However, after a moment of contemplation, Zheng Gui also realized that Huimeng and his 3 companions were just looking for a reason to exchange the secret script with Master Huidun, who was in charge of the Sutra Pavilion. What he said was like bringing his 3 companions specifically to earn the other 2 monks, who were deeply moved. "I used to think that the temple was a place for monks to practice, and it must be a place of tranquility and leisure. However, after more than 10 days of experience and observation, I realized that there is no such thing as a pure land in the world. The Daxiong Zen temple is also similar to the mortal world. These old monks are all refined, popular, mysterious, and intelligent people." With a light sigh in his heart, Zheng Gui heard the tall monk point to a bookshelf full of scriptures and say, "You are responsible for organizing the books on this bookshelf, wiping off the dust on the bookshelf, and arranging the scriptures neatly without damaging them." After giving an explanation, the monk went to the next bookshelf with annoyance and joy. Kong Lu Zheng Gui stared blankly at the tall, 3-zhang long bookshelf. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Reincarnation Beads. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Reincarnation Beads. Zheng Gui was looking at dozens of bookshelves and a plethora of books in the Sutra Pavilion, eager to rush over and search for martial art secrets. But rationality allowed Zheng Gui to control his emotions. He took a deep breath, turned his head to look around, and saw that he was on the 1st floor, with no one nearby except for Li Fan, Li Shi, and the monk who was separated by a bookshelf. Zheng Gui also heard his senior brothers chatting about a lot of information in the temple and knew that the Sutra Pavilion was divided into 2 levels. The first layer is mostly composed of Buddhist scriptures and practice notes from senior experts in our temple. There are not many true martial arts secrets, and even if there are, they are only some basic martial arts and breathing techniques. The martial arts that can only be practiced by true disciples are stored in the second layer. Under normal circumstances, the shamans from the mixed service courtyard can only sweep on the 1st floor, so the chance for Zheng Gui to enter the 2nd floor is very slim. However, Zheng Gui was not too greedy. As an extremely poor novice monk, he knew that even if he obtained the martial arts of the Temple Town School, the Heavenly Dragon Demon Suppression Technique, it would be difficult for him to cultivate. On the contrary, the basic martial arts that laid the foundation were now more suitable for him. Taking out a cloth, he walked over to the nearby bucket and set it aside for a while. Then Zheng Gui walked to the bookshelf and glanced at the number Jia Lu written on the bookshelf he was responsible for, followed by 120 Tibetan scriptures totaling 329 volumes. With just one glance at Zheng Gui, he withdrew his gaze and began wiping away the gaps that had accumulated dust. The handyman monk can learn some words before he is 7 years old. Only after the eminent monk of the Arhat hall checks his bones and selects his disciples can the loser become a fire monk. After becoming a pyrotechnic monk, not only was his status at the bottom of the temple, but he was also unable to learn martial arts and writing. Therefore, every novice monk only recognized dozens or hundreds of words, and was completely illiterate in understanding Buddhist scripture sentences. Zheng Gui is not the ignorant little monk from his predecessor. Although the characters in this world are much different from those in his past life, under his heart, Zheng Gui has quietly learned hundreds of more characters by watching his senior brother copy scriptures in morning and evening classes. His cultural level has successfully advanced from being semi-illiterate to the level of second and third grade in elementary school. Because he had just arrived at the Sutra Pavilion, Zheng Gui dared not show any negligence. First, he carefully wiped the bookshelf for a while. During this time, Master Huidun came in once, but he didn't look at him directly, and then there was no further movement. After Zheng Gui became familiar with the environment and saw that no one was on guard against him, he breathed a sigh of relief and thought to himself. It seems that, as our senior brothers have said, there are not many decent martial arts classics in the tens of thousands of scriptures on the first level. Otherwise, Huidun and others would not have trusted us so much. It is inevitable that we are not afraid of reading and learning recklessly. This is not only because we are all semi-literate and cannot understand, but also because we have not cherished classics. Zheng Gui put down his cloth and casually flicked a few times on the dozens of scriptures in front of him. Seeing that they were all Tripitaka and Daxing Zen Master's discourse on eliminating confusion, he pretended to organize the books while reading their titles. After a while, Zheng Gui quickly finished reading the entire bookshelf and finally saw a thin notebook in the corner, with Ditong Fist written on the cover. After looking left and right, Zheng Gui saw no one carefully opening it to take a look. After about a stick of incense, Zheng Gui finally flipped through the secret books of the underground martial arts. The martial arts manual was only briefly reviewed, but the mnemonic techniques and pile techniques were firmly memorized. Afterwards, Zheng Gui worked while memorizing. When lunchtime arrived, he immediately left the Sutra Pavilion and did not go to the fragrant kitchen. Instead, he hid in the tower forest behind the temple and began to quietly stand and breathe, practicing his underground fist technique. An hour later, Zheng Gui's legs were sore and numb as he put aside his frame. He compared his mental skills and did not feel any progress. Shaking his head, he thought to himself, is it true that my aptitude is really poor? It's difficult for me to even practice basic underground martial arts to get started. The root bone represents a person's ability to coordinate physical reactions, as well as the strength of qi, blood, meridians, and other aspects. If the root bone is poor, it is difficult to cultivate martial arts. Even if one is forced to practice, it will result in half the effort and limited achievements. Because of this, the little monk with poor roots was abandoned by the eminent monk of Arhat Hall and had to work hard in the factotum hall. Zheng Gui only realized how poor his bones were after practicing this skill. Although he had mastered the cultivation method of the underground fist, he either had difficulty breathing or had a disharmony in his waist while standing on the post. In short, it was difficult to get started, and even worse as he practiced. After wiping off his sweat, Zheng Gui frowned and pondered, it seems that I want to practice martial arts more difficult than I imagined, and it will be even harder in the future, but I won't give up. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye, during which Zheng Gui was on duty at the Sutra Pavilion every day. In addition to Di Tang Quan, he also discovered 3 or 4 martial arts techniques such as for sitting and lying plans of Master Daxiong, Xiong Yao Jin, and Tong Zi Gong. These martial arts are all the basic martial arts of Daxiong Zen Temple, each with its own characteristics, such as breathing and breathing techniques, boxing techniques, external hard skills, and so on. Zheng Gui devoted himself to practicing for 3 days, but most of his martial arts were difficult to get started with. Only Xiong Yao Jin, who had the lowest requirements for basic skills, finally managed to get started after practicing 3 times. Xiong Yao Jin is an external martial arts skill that requires physical strength, and can be said to be the most basic martial arts in the temple. It has never been valued or guarded against being learned. If there are more experienced miscellaneous monks, there will be more people practicing in order to enhance their physical strength and work faster. After practicing Xiong Yao Jin, Zheng Gui secretly estimated his progress and knew that if there were no adventures, it would take more than 3 years to cultivate the only layer of Xiong Yao Jin. At that time, he might be able to cultivate other martial arts, and even if he practiced until he died, he might not be able to develop true qi, let alone step into the true realm of martial arts. After finishing morning classes, Zheng Gui returned to the Sutra Pavilion to continue his duties. After flipping through the last bookshelf, Zheng Gui couldn't help but let out a sigh. He had already gone through more than 50 bookshelves on the first floor and covered 13,000 volumes of scriptures, and found that there were only 5 beginner-level martial arts, and the only one he could cultivate was Xiong Yao Jin. Zheng Gui knew that there was no more suitable foundation building martial arts for him, and he understood even more how poor his qualifications were. He could only dispel his illusions and think of practicing Xiong Yao Jin well before proceeding. Although he had already recognized reality, his sense of powerlessness still made Zheng Gui feel uneasy. He knew that martial arts also require a state of mind, so he picked up a copy of the Prajnaparamita Sutra and flipped through it, hoping to read it to calm his thoughts and broaden his mind. But as Zheng Gui opened the Buddhist scriptures for the first time, as soon as he read a line of words, a white light burst out in front of him. Then he saw that everything in front of him had become transparent, and then turned into nothingness, revealing a Buddha pearl emitting Buddhist light amidst the emptiness. Zheng Gui's heart was filled with joy and he thought to himself, has it been the payment of the golden finger? Thinking of this, Zheng Gui's mind involuntarily sank into the Buddha's pearl, and a lot of information came to mind. Not long after, Zheng Gui opened his eyes, closed and put away the Prajnaparamita Sutra, and then fell into contemplation. It turned out that Zheng Gui activated the golden finger in his mind by reading Buddhist scriptures, an unknown existence called reincarnation beads. After the connection between consciousness and the reincarnation bead, Zheng Gui knew that the reincarnation bead was a Buddhist treasure, and it was precisely because it was a Buddhist treasure that it was activated by Zheng Gui's reading of Buddhist scriptures. The reincarnation bead is a supreme Buddhist deity with the concept of one mind, one world. It allows one's consciousness to travel through countless worlds in 3,000 great worlds, and after experiencing it, all learned knowledge is infused into the body. However, in order to activate the samsara beads for reincarnation, one must accumulate self-nature good deeds by reading Buddhist scriptures. Only by accumulating self-nature good deeds can one use the samsara beads. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Smiling and Proud in the Jianghu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Smiling and Proud in the Jianghu. After learning about the wonderful use of the reincarnation pearl, Zheng Gui immediately understood that no matter how poor his qualifications were, he could finally step into cultivation in the future. Zheng Gui understood that his cultivation path was hidden within the cycle of reincarnation. As long as he could reincarnate several times or even dozens of times over time, relying on the cultivation of the reincarnation world to nourish his body, he would eventually become a master. Zheng Gui stood quietly in the Sutra Pavilion, pondering all the messages of the reincarnation bead. He thought to himself, this reincarnation bead has left my skin bag and sent all my soul essence to the small world of the great thousand world for reincarnation and training. When I turn around, I can absorb all the reborn essence and power, which is naturally a good treasure. I think reincarnation is like a dungeon, but there are no fixed tasks, but there is a time limit. The reincarnation bead is just a magic weapon bound in Zheng Gui's consciousness, not a system or program. It is very simple. All Zheng Gui needs to do is accumulate good deeds and self-nature by reading Buddhist scriptures. When it reaches a certain level of accumulation, the reincarnation bead will light up to indicate that it is in an activated state, and then Zheng Gui can transmit and shuttle through the reincarnation bead at any time. When Zheng Gui's consciousness traveled to the world of Shaoqian to experience, no matter how long it had passed, it was only a moment in the real world. However, how long Zheng Gui could stay in the world of Shaoqian depends on the degree of self-perception and the amount of good deeds. In general, activating once is enough to support Zheng Gui's stay in the small world for a year, but good deeds can be accumulated. As long as Zheng Gui is willing to spend time, he can fully accumulate years or even decades of time by reading Buddhist scriptures. Even after entering the world of Shaoqian, one can extend their time by reading Buddhist scriptures. In short, Zheng Gui can only control how long they stay on his own, and the only difference is hard work. At the end of the mountain and water, Zheng Gui finally obtained the golden finger. Although there were many conditions to use this reincarnation bead, Zheng Gui was already grateful to the Buddha in his heart. By this time, he was convinced that the world was infinite and sacred, and his thoughts on becoming immortal and immortality were clear in his heart. Although my qualifications are not very strong, as long as I use the reincarnation beads to constantly travel through various realms and accumulate skills through reincarnation for several lifetimes, the accumulation of quantitative changes will inevitably lead to qualitative changes. In his heart, he secretly made a vow, and Zheng Gui let go of all his thoughts and distractions. Every day, except for being on duty at the Sutra Pavilion, he started reading Buddhist scriptures while holding them. Even Xiong Yao Jin, who had already mastered them, rarely practiced. Due to the fact that the first level is filled with Buddhist scriptures and low-level martial arts classics, they are never taken seriously, and Zheng Gui and other miscellaneous shamans are not restricted in entering and exiting. Therefore, not only does he read scriptures in the Sutra Pavilion, but he also hides in secluded places to browse through the collected scriptures. Slowly, as Zheng Gui read more and more scriptures, he also began to understand Buddhism. Every day, new scriptures lit up on the circular beads of reincarnation in the sea of consciousness. Only when all the scriptures engraved on the beads were lit up would it be a manifestation of the accumulation of good deeds and the realization of self-nature. 3 months have passed in the blink of an eye. Zheng Gui was transferred from the Sutra Pavilion last month after his term expired. However, in recent months, he has been constantly flipping through the borrowed Daxiong Zen Master Enlightenment Treatise from the Sutra Pavilion, accumulating good skills and improving his self-nature. On that day, Zheng Gui finished picking water and it was already noon. He saw that there was no one in the water room and knew that his disciples had all gone to the Xiangji kitchen for dinner. He was not in a hurry and sat under the shade of a tree. He took out the Enlightenment Treatise Volume 6 from his arms and carefully flipped through it. After half an hour, Zheng Gui was pondering the phrase, "Abandoning the four greats is like abandoning my humble shoes. When I see that I am not myself, I will shine brightly." Suddenly, his eyes lit up and his mind sank into the sea of consciousness. Then, Zheng Gui saw the reincarnation beads emitting endless Buddha light, illuminating himself. Looking at the translucent light on the bead of reincarnation, Zheng Gui knew that his good deeds had been accumulated and his self-nature had gradually reached enlightenment, so the bead of reincarnation was activated. Zheng Gui had been preparing for several months, and seeing that he could finally shuttle through space, he had a sudden thought and his consciousness integrated into the reincarnation beads. The bead of reincarnation suddenly lit up and then disappeared. Zheng Gui's consciousness and the reincarnation bead are integrated into one. He only feels that he has jumped out of the world in an instant, and then came to an infinite long river. Looking at the countless bubbles in the river, every place is a small world. He looks around and sees the familiar world of scientific and technological civilization, as well as the anime world. Many worlds look very exciting, some make Zheng Gui feel familiar, while others are unfamiliar. Zheng Gui didn't know if he could return to his original form if he was killed after being reborn in the world of Shaoqian, so any world that felt dangerous quickly withdrew his gaze. At the same time, Zheng Gui thought that the world he could help should not only be less dangerous, but also preferably a familiar one. At the same time, his power system should be able to connect with his own world, so he purposefully searched for the world of martial arts. Buddhism emphasizes the cycle of cause and effect. When one thinks about it, all things come to life. When one sees a flower, a world of flowers grows. When one hears sorrow, a life of suffering arises. Zheng Gui knows what kind of small world he can enter randomly, and he can also choose freely. However, regardless of the method, the cause and effect will already be predetermined when the idea arises. Just like the journey of mountaineering, or walking on stone steps and wide roads, or taking remote paths, or climbing steep cliffs, each journey has different scenic experiences that cannot be turned back, let alone repeated. Each step is destined for future changes, which is fate-based emptiness, and this is fate-based meeting. Although Zheng Gui was a beginner in Buddhism, he had already achieved enlightenment through the help of the reincarnation beads, and his mind was clear. He naturally understood the law of cause and effect, so he carefully looked towards the countless small worlds in the universe in front of him. Because Zheng Gui is only a mortal body, he can only cycle through the small thousand worlds at present. This long river that contains time and space only flows through countless small thousand worlds. After looking at several worlds, Zheng Gui realized that most of them had nothing unusual about them, and there was nothing extraordinary about them. After waiting for a moment, Zheng Gui finally saw two worlds that seemed to be from the era of Huang Feihong and Huiyuanjia, and saw decent martial arts skills. Zheng Gui understood that the world of martial arts was suitable for him. He realized that he was most familiar with the works of the four great heroes, Jianghu, Wen Huang. Considering safety and growth environment, he still wanted to find some from the martial arts world of Jin and Huang. Thousands of small worlds were only able to swim before Zheng Gui's eyes in a moment. He did not see a martial arts world of Huang Daxia, only a young hero of Wen Daxia and a book, sword, friendship, and enmity record of Jin Daxia. Zheng Gui knew that the world of Wen Daxia was as perilous as that of Gu Daxia, especially unfriendly to the villains and even the protagonists, so he was not even prepared to choose. However, the martial arts system in Jin Daxia's book, sword, and grudges seems to be slightly lower, and even internal power is a luxury. Pure external skills are clearly not enough for the world where demons and monsters exist. Zheng Gui waited for a long time before passing through countless worlds. Finally, he saw the sword intent emanating from the 5 famous mountains on the central plains in a water droplet, as well as the evil energy from the Haimu cliff in Hebei. Knowing that this was the manifestation of the will of Shaoqian world, he laughed and immediately transformed into a meteor shooting into this world. Previously, there were many troubles in the world, but why is it difficult to be proud of the world with a smile? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Qualitative Little Zen Master of the Hengshan School. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Qualitative Little Zen Master of the Hengshan School. The Hengshan Mountain, located in Hunyuan County, Datong Prefecture, is one of the 5 sacred mountains. It has many dangerous and unique features, with rocks covered in vegetation and exposed areas covered in yellow soil, revealing a weathered atmosphere similar to the Great Wall hundreds of miles away in the north. On the main peak of Mount Hengshan, the visible nature peak is shrouded in endless white clouds all year round. There is nothing at the top of the peak, only a small temple with 2 entrances in front and back. There are more than 30 tiled houses next to the temple, and there are many monk robes and clothes hanging on the clothesline outside the door. It is obvious that people are living there. On the west side of the peak, several hundred zhang away, there are 3 large tiled houses with newer bricks and tiles, which are more imposing than the temple and nearby tiled houses. At this time, it is March in the sunny spring, and even the north wind on Mount Hengshan's visible peak is weak and invisible. A moist and warm breeze passes through the mountain pass and brushes over the peak. A little shaman wearing a black monk robe pushed the door out of the tiled house at the east end, walked onto a giant rock facing the wind, stood on a stake in front of the sunrise to regulate his breath. After a while, he suddenly let out a long howl, then stretched his arms and lowered his waist like an ape, and began a series of punches and kicks. After a burn of incense, the little monk finally jumped off the boulder, stood still and slowly adjusted his breath. After a while, his body shook and he smiled, saying, "I have become more proficient in practicing this set of 7-star long fist." The little monk looked around the age of 13 or 14. He had pale eyebrows and dark skin, narrow eyes, and although his figure was a bit thin, his height was not short. This little monk was Zheng Gui, who entered the world of laughing and proud Jianghu through the reincarnation ball for over a year. At that time, Zheng Gui was able to revive a small beggar who had just starved after entering this realm. Zheng Gui, who woke up, didn't know where the plot had progressed in the current era. He wanted to learn from his master and recalled the information about the major sects of Shaolin, Wudang, the 5 Sacred Sword sect, Kunlun sect, Beggar's sect, and other sects in the original work. He was ready to choose his master from them. Zheng Gui knew that in the martial arts world of Jin Daxia, although qualifications are also emphasized, the qualifications here mainly refer to a person's comprehension and comprehension ability, with a small part being the fundamental meridians. If one's physical condition is poor or even disabled, as long as their understanding is not poor or they are taught by famous teachers, there are also many people who have achieved success in cultivating martial arts. If it is true in Xianmen Buddhism, one may also need to pay attention to their mental cultivation. However, the rules and regulations are still much more lenient than the world in which their body is located. Zheng Gui knew that most of the martial arts in the world where his body was located were advanced martial arts, so he had stricter requirements for the practitioner's essence, qi, blood, meridians, muscles, and bones. If he did not meet the standards, he was not suitable for practicing martial arts. Even if he practiced forcibly, he would achieve twice the result with half the effort and his achievements would be limited. Knowing that the two realms were different, Zheng Gui discovered through physical examination that he had no disabilities or illnesses, and that his limbs were healthy, so he decided to pursue a master's degree. Zheng Gui is a disciple of Buddhism, and if he continues to cultivate Buddhist martial arts, he will return to his original form after achieving success in his future cultivation. Even if he is seen to possess martial arts, he can always find excuses to deal with one or two under the cover of Buddhist martial arts. If someone discovers that they have practiced the demon cult and other martial arts, most of the senior members of the Daxiong Zen temple will arrest them and treat them as demons, spies, and even demons and ghosts. After much contemplation, Zheng Gui could only give up the relatively better Beggar's sect and focus only on the only two major Buddhist sects, the Shaolin Temple in Songshan and the Hengshan sect. Zheng Gui was envious of the tendon-changing classic of Shaolin Temple, which changed people's aptitude, but he knew that as a famous martial artist for hundreds of years, it was too difficult for him, a powerless little beggar, to join it. The Hengshan sect is mainly composed of nuns and almost only has female disciples. As a male, it is quite difficult for oneself to join it. However, although the major Buddhist sects are martial arts sects, they also specialize in Buddhism and have a deep belief in Buddhist teachings. They have memorized many of Master Daxiong's treatises and rely on their profound Buddhist insights. As long as they can see the high monks and nuns of both sects, they will be able to impress them and become beginners. So although it may seem the most difficult, in fact, with the blessing of many scriptures in the Daxiong Zen Temple scripture collection, Zheng Gui's hope of entering the Buddhist sect is actually the greatest. After thinking about the rules, Zheng Gui stopped thinking about it. He survived by catching fish, picking wild fruits, begging and other means, and then cultivated Xiong shaking strength to strengthen his body. He also inquired about the news. He thought that if it was near Zhongnan Mountain, he might find the 9-yin manual in the Tomb of the Living Dead. About 10 days later, Zheng Gui finally found out through various investigations that he was near Shuazhou, Shaanxi, and there were very few nearby martial arts sections. After inquiring about the distance between this place and Zhongnan Mountain, Wudang Mountain, and other famous mountains and rivers, Zheng Gui, considering his age of 12 or 13 in his frail body, dared not take risks and could only go to the nearest Hengshan, thinking of bowing to the Hengshan sect first. The hardships on the road were self-evident, and Zheng Gui relied on the strength of a bear to give him strength comparable to that of an adult male, which allowed him to safely reach the foot of Mount Hengshan. It had been 2 months since he entered the realm. After climbing Mount Hengshan to see the peak of sexuality, Zheng Gui, dressed in tattered clothes, met many nuns and lay disciples of the Hengshan sect in front of the colorless temple. With Zheng Gui's persistence, he soon met an old nun from the head of the Hengshan sect, whose Dharma name was kind. Zheng Gui's speech and demeanor far surpassed that of a teenage beggar, especially in order to impress the kind-hearted abbess and express his astonishing views on the uniqueness of Buddhism in some of the teachings of Master Daxiong. Empress Dowager Cixin will take him as a closed-door disciple, bestow the Dharma name Qualitative, and personally shave Zheng Gui's head. From then on, the true disciples of the Hengshan sect changed from the 3 determinations of Hengshan to the 4 determinations of Hengshan. The disciples of the secular family and other kind-hearted senior sisters were all stationed in various temples to preside over the temple. On the vast Hengshan Jianqing peak, Zheng Gui, who was over 10 years old, became the head of the sect and passed down the door. He became the sister and brother of the already famous Hengshan 3 determinations. Empress Dowager Cixin is almost 70 years old and is one of the elite disciples of the Hengshan sect after the Battle of Huashan by the demon cult. In recent years, her energy has declined and she has already entrusted the affairs of the sect to the management of her eldest disciple Ding Jing. However, after accepting Zheng Gui, Empress Dowager Cixin personally taught her own Buddhism, as well as Zheng Gui's introductory 7-star fist and breathing technique. More than 10 months had passed since Zheng Gui became his disciple at Hengshan. Although he was young, he was still placed in a guest room on the west side of Jianxing Feng due to differences in gender. He did not have to attend morning classes with his fellow disciples every day, but had to visit his mentor at Wuzhen every 3 days. The mentor personally checked his academic progress. Nun Cixin knows that the Hengshan sect has always been low-key and undisputed, and is also at the bottom of the 5 Mountain Sword sect. Even though it is a martial arts sect, its reputation is not well known. Apart from having some grudges with the Sun and Moon Divine sect, there are no enemies in the martial arts world. Therefore, Zheng Gui's apprenticeship would not necessarily be a thief's conspiracy, and at this time, with the new alliance leader Songshan sect at the forefront, the demon cult would not go to great lengths to send a young man to engage in any conspiracy. Moreover, after a few encounters with Empress Dowager Cixin and Zheng Gui, they knew that this son's Buddhist cultivation was remarkable. Occasionally, his words were only words that could be understood by great monks, which greatly inspired them. He was not an ordinary person. She believed that no one in the world could cultivate such a person, and perhaps there was no more suitable reason besides the reincarnation of a great monk or someone like the 6th ancestor Huineng. It is precisely based on this point that Abbess Cixin personally recruited Zheng Gui as an entry-level disciple and classified him as her own personal disciple. There is no rule in the rules of the Hengshan sect that male disciples cannot be accepted. In the past, not accepting male disciples was just to avoid trouble and also to worry about damaging reputation. Now, when encountering the reincarnation of a great virtue and entering the sect, it is likely that the prosperity of our sect will fall on this son. Why not accept it? End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Mount Taishan Assembly. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 5 Mount Taishan Assembly. Having lived in Hengshan for nearly a year, Zheng Gui not only became proficient in the basic techniques of breathing and boxing, but also gained a clear understanding of the current era and the situation in the martial arts world. It turns out that the world of Xiaoao Jianghu does not require the connection between the Sage Trilogy and the Divine Eagle. Although there are also many similar characters appearing, they are different historical lines and timelines, so when calculated, they should be parallel universes. After listening to his mentor, Empress Dowager Cixin, talk about the old stories of the martial arts world, Zheng Gui realized that many characters in the 3 kingdoms of the Condor heroes had never appeared in this world, and even Ming Buddhism had never existed. From the beginning, it was a battle between the Sun and Moon cults and the major sects in the Central Plains. There is not much difference in history, and it is also a change in the Sui, Tang, Song, and Yuan dynasties, with only a slight deviation at the end of the Yuan dynasty 200 years ago. It was not Zhu Yuanzhang who unified China, let alone the Ming dynasty. Chen Yuliang swept away the 6 harmonies, while the current court is called Chen Han. Zheng Gui is very sorry about this, because though the 9 Yin Manual and 9 Yang scripture have never appeared in the history of this world. Chuanjian Taoism is a Taoism religion, not a big sect in Wulin, and the ancient tomb sect has never appeared at all, which indicates that there will probably be no the 9 Yin Manual stone carvings and Chuanjian martial arts stone carvings in the tombs of living dead people in Zhongnan Mountain. Mingjiao and Zhang Wuji have never appeared, and the burial place of the 9 Yang scriptures, which symbolize the Kunlun secret realm, cannot be found. Zheng Gui knew that many of the adventures he secretly planned might have failed, but he was not discouraged, because his number of reincarnations was unlimited. As long as he could bear it, he could travel to the trilogy in the future, and had the opportunity to learn the 9 Yang Manual and the 9 Yin Manual of Taoism. As for the timeline of Xiaoao Jianghu, Zheng Gui calculated and found that there are still at least 20 years left until the development of the plot. Because the Battle of Sword Qi of the Huashan sect occurred 5 years ago. The current leader of the demon cult, Ren Wuxing, just took over the reins of power 2 years ago, and the leader of the Huashan sect of the 5 Sacred Swords sect is now not Yubuchuan. Moreover, Zheng Gui knew that his eldest senior sister, Ding Jing, was only 30.7 or 8 years old, and his third senior sister, Ding Yi, was only in her 30s. The Huashan gentleman sword Yubuchuan was also only in his 30s and had not yet taken over the leadership position. Zhuo Lengshan, who took over as the head of the Songshan sect last year, is in his 40s. Yu Canhai, the head of the Qingqing sect, is also in his 40s. The head of the Fuwei escort agency in Fujian is still Lin Zhongxiong, the father of Lin Zhennan. Moreover, due to the lack of first-class experts in the escort agency, his reputation in the martial arts world in recent years has been far inferior to that of Lin Yuantu during his lifetime. Zheng Gui knew that the plot of Xiaoao Jianghu began with the entry of the Qingqing sect into Fujian to plot the Lin family's exorcism sword technique. At that time, Lin Zhennan was the head of the Fuwei escort agency, and his son Lin Pingji was only 19 or 20 years old. The other leaders of the major sects were all around 60 years old. Therefore, based on the age of these characters, Zheng Gui speculated that it was only over 20 years since the original plot began. Zheng Gui calculated the time just to understand his own era. He knew that he wouldn't be able to benefit from following Ling Huchong after the plot started. Dugu Jiujian was a prominent skill in the martial arts world, and the star-absorbing technique was also a divine skill of the demon cult. He couldn't even intercept Ling Huchong, and there were no natural treasures to enhance his skills in this world. Zheng Gui knew that he could only become a regular martial arts practitioner, constantly practicing and reading scriptures. With long-term accumulation, he became a top performer in the martial arts world 10 or 20 years later. As it was a world of reincarnation, Zheng Gui was not afraid of wasting time. He went back to his room to wipe his hands and face, and the feeling of sweat disappeared immediately. Then he took out a book of the Lotus Sutra and carefully read it. Zheng Gui's practice of the beginner's breathing technique was just beginning to give him a sense of internal breathing, and his external martial arts were only just beginning, so he was far from achieving the goal of preventing his body fluids from leaking out. After intense exercise, he naturally sweated and became tired. In the first half of the year, Zheng Gui integrated into the Hengshan sect, not only training Xiong Yaojin to achieve a strength of 1,000 pounds, but also mastering the basic techniques of breathing and boxing in the Hengshan sect within a few months. After more than half an hour, Zheng Gui suddenly noticed the brightness of the reincarnation pearl and smiled in his heart, saying, "It can be extended for another year. By practicing martial arts and reading scriptures like this, I can stay in the world of Xiaoao for a long time. If it takes decades, even if I only practice Hengshan martial arts, it will be enough for me to become a first-class expert in the martial arts world. When the time comes, I will return to my true self. He. With the rich internal power infused into my body in this lifetime, regardless of his poor bone aptitude and insufficient qi and blood, he is not the material for practicing martial arts. I am immediately a martial arts master. After putting down the scriptures, Zheng Gui drank a cup of tea and got up to tidy up his clothes. Thinking it was time to pay respects to his mentor, he strode to the colorless temple. The colorless temple is the main temple of the Hengshan sect, but the temple is simple and narrow, and has always been inhabited only by the sect leader, while the other disciples and lay disciples live in the tiled houses outside the temple. However, because the martial arts of the three disciples, Ding Jing, Ding Xian, and Ding Yi, have become quite outstanding, Empress Dowager Cixin has entrusted the affairs of the sect to them in recent years. Therefore, although the main altar of the Hengshan sect is still a colorless temple, the Baiyun Temple on the mountainside has become the most lively and famous place for the Hengshan sect to communicate and transfer with the outside world because the three disciples are guarding it. When Zheng Gui arrived at the colorless temple, two nuns who were serving in front of the temple stood up and said, "Master Qualitative." Zheng Gui clasped his hands and saluted, saying, "Amitabha Buddha is the leader in the temple." The older nun is the nephew of the kind-hearted nun. In recent years, she has been serving the head martial uncle and smiled, saying, "The head martial uncle just had his fate. He was about to let me wait to call you." Senior sister Ding Jing and two junior sisters, Ding Xian and Ding Yi, have also arrived and are talking to the head in the temple. Zheng Gui's eyebrows trembled and he whispered, "Is there anything big?" Saying goodbye, and I entered the colorless temple. Entering the temple, Zheng Gui glanced at the main hall and saw the incense burner in front of the statue of Guanyin in white inside, with pillars of incense inserted. He guessed that three senior sisters had worshipped before passing through the front yard. As he entered the last room, he saw three cattails in front of the east wing door, each sitting with three middle-aged nuns of varying heights. They looked like three calm, leisurely nuns. In front of the three nuns were sitting on soft stools with a thoughtful and compassionate expression on their faces. After Zheng Gui entered the door, he first bowed to his mentor, and then bowed to the three senior sisters. Ding Jing and the three of them also stood up to pay their respects. Although Zheng Gui has been apprenticed for nearly a year, because Ding Jing and the other three are in charge of the affairs of the sect, they often have to travel around, so they have only seen each other a few times. Due to the significant age difference and lack of emotional foundation, the four of them did not chat or exchange pleasantries after the ceremony and stood in front of the compassionate abbess. Nun Mercy was already very old after 70. She raised her eyes to look at the four proud disciples and whispered, "Be quiet, let your younger martial brother read the letters of Mount Taishan sect." Ding Jing agreed and took out an opened letter from her sleeve, handing it to Zheng Gui. Mount Taishan sent Yupuzi Mishuji to pay homage to the benevolent abbess Hengshan colorless nunnery. After Zheng Gui received the letter, Zhan read the beginning, and his heart was moved. He remembered the Mount Taishan conference when Mount Hua declined and Mount Song won the title of the Five Mountains Alliance leader. He said in his heart, "It was the letter from the leader of Mount Taishan. What's the big deal? Is it Mount Taishan Assembly?" End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Transmission. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Transmission. Farewell to Mount Hua. For years in a hurry, Lingfeng reminisces from afar, eagerly anticipating good news. Since I succeeded as the head of the demon cult, I have recruited a wide range of disciples, and many villains in the martial arts world have joined the demon cult to cause harm to the world. At this time of the rise and fall of good and evil, our five sacred swords sect should uphold justice and determine the world. However, 5 years ago, the Huashan sect had siblings fighting against each other in the same room, which greatly damaged the vitality of our five sacred swords sect and no longer had the power to lead the five sacred alliance. In order to prevent the five mountain sword sect from being defeated by the demon sect, I dare to invite our leader and elder martial brother Qi to Mount Taishan Sun Watching Peak and agree on the new leader of the league. After reading the letter written by the leader of Mount Taishan, Yupuzi, Zheng Gui said in a deep voice, "Mount Taishan sect wants to capture the Five Mountains Alliance leader after seeing Huashan sect's decline. As soon as Zheng Gui said this, the kind-hearted abbess looked at Ding Jing and the three of them, with a smile on her lips. Ting Jing and Ting Leisure are still looking at Zheng Gui, but Ding Yi praises him. Younger martial brother is really smart. Although he is young, he is exquisite. Shifu says you can see that the old Taoist priest Mount Taishan is not at ease at a glance. Sure enough. Senior sister praised me falsely. Zheng Gui nodded calmly and said, is master here for this matter? The kind-hearted abbess coughed and said. Yes, now the situation between good and evil is turbulent, and the world is changing. I am not very healthy when I am old. The 5 mountains meeting invited by Mount Taishan sect requires you to discuss with your teachers, sisters and brothers. Calm down, be a Buddha with wisdom. You should discuss things with him more often. Ding Jing and the three of them quickly bowed and agreed. Ding Jing's gaze softened as he looked at Zheng Gui and asked, Junior brother, in your opinion, what are the causes and consequences of this matter? What should we do with the Hengshan sect? Zheng Gui knew that among the 3 senior sisters, the eldest senior sister Ding Jing and the second senior sister Ding Xian were both meticulous, brave and strategic talents. Even though he didn't say anything, they could always guess something. But when he remembered that the Songshan sect would annex Hengshan in the future, he wanted to behave well, strive to be enough strategists, and find ways to protect his sect. Upon hearing this, Zheng Gui politely said, the Huashan sect was originally the leader of our 5 sacred sword sect, but they fought fiercely over their sword energy. Now only a few disciples of the Qi sect are surviving, how can they still hold on to the position of leader? This is not only because the Huashan sect is unable to govern the 5 sects anymore, but they are also really too busy to care about themselves. The other factions with strong capabilities naturally want to replace them. Dingjing's face showed joy, while Dingxian's expression remained unchanged. Only Dingyi clapped his hands and said, what junior brother said is that Mount Hengshan in the north has no intention of fame or fortune, and there are no outstanding figures in Mount Hengshan in the south. Although Mo Da and Lu Jingfeng have good martial arts, they have always been at odds and naturally dare not expect to replace them. But the Mount Taishan sect is full of talents. There are more than 10 old Taoists of the Jade generation and more than 30 of the Tianzi generation. Who in our 5 mountains sect has more than one of them? Zheng Gui nodded and said, the Mount Taishan sect has the most senior experts. They recovered the fastest in the Huashan Demon Destruction War. If any sect has the strength to be the leader, it is really the Mount Taishan sect. The old Taoist is not stupid, and naturally he wants to be the leader. But Ding Yi asked, just what? Ding Jing was also puzzled, but Ding Xian smiled and said, younger martial brother, what you mean is that the new left leader of the Song Mountain sect has excellent kung fu. In the past 2 years, the Song Mountain sect has become famous and famous. I'm afraid that the Song Mountain sect also wants to be the leader of the alliance, so the Mount Taishan sect may not be able to achieve its wish. Zheng Gui wore a respectful expression on his face and arched his hand, saying, senior sister, you are very clever. That's exactly what I was thinking. He exclaimed in his heart, truly worthy of being the future leader of the Hengshan sect. He really has a keen eye and mind. Dingxian speaks and does things in an orderly manner, always gentle and gentle. She asked, junior brother, how do you think our Hengshan sect should deal with the competition for the alliance leader in this conference? Zheng Gui looked at his teacher's face and saw that his teacher was smiling. He said loudly, we Hengshan sect don't seek fame and wealth, and most of the disciples are monks. Naturally, we won't fight for the alliance leader, but as a member of the 5 Mountain Sword sect, we can't stop to attend the meeting. I don't think our master will condescend to go there. Most of the first and second elder martial sisters are you 2 or the third elder martial sisters who went to Mount Taishan to see the sun. Ding Jing and Ding Xian were secretly shocked in their hearts, and only then did they realize how well their mentor had received their junior brother. They also believed their mentor's claim that his junior brother was a reincarnation of great virtue. Ding Yi was originally impatient, but now he is in front of his closest master and sister. Naturally, he is too lazy to think and looks directly at Abbess Cixin, asking, "Master, is what junior brother said?" With a compassionate chant of the Buddha's name, he said, "You three have good martial arts skills and have gained fame in the martial arts world in recent years. I have successors in Hengshan, and I can be considered worry-free. The world knows that I have long intended to pass on the position of sect leader to Jing. Coincidentally, during this 5 Sacred Mountains conference, Jing will go on my behalf. When you come back, I will pass on the position of sect leader to you. The rise and fall of our sect will depend on you in the future." As the compassionate nun spoke, she took off the prayer beads in her hand and the short sword at her waist, ready to pass it on to her. Ding Jing knelt down and said, "Master, you are in the prime of spring and autumn. How can you pass it on to me? Moreover, my disciples have already said that I am not as cunning as Sister Dingxian. Now that Huashan is in decline, my 5 sacred sword sect has lost its leader, and the demon sect is thriving. Even if you really want to pass on the throne, you should give it to Sister Dingxian." Upon hearing this, Dingxian had already knelt down to plead for mercy. Zheng Gui saw Ding Yi looking at him, so he took 2 steps back. Ding Yi quickly followed suit and leaned over to Zheng Gui's ear, whispering, "Junior brother, who do you think Master will pass it on to?" Zheng Gui shook his head gently and said, "Who can guess Master's thoughts?" Although that was the case, Zheng Gui knew about the future affairs and his gaze turned to Abbess Dingxian. After a moment of dispute, with the persistence of the compassionate and calm masters, the prayer beads and short swords representing the leader's identity were still taught to Ding Xian's hands. 2 personal magic tools of the founder of the founding sect, Sister Xiaofeng, have arrived in Ding Xian's hands, which also means that she is already the leader of the Hengshan sect at this time, but still needs a succession ceremony. Nun Kindness smiled, reached out her hand and gently touched Ding Xian's head, kneeling in front of her, and said, "You are the leader. It's not a snub to go to Mount Taishan to attend the meeting. We will choose an auspicious day to hold the ceremony when you and Ding Jing come back." The change of leadership of Hengshan sect was completed in a small nunnery, and then Nun Kindness wrote a personal letter as a reply to Zhijing, and then drove the 3 nuns to Baiyun Nunnery to prepare for the meeting in Mount Taishan. After the 3 of Ding Xian, Ding Jing, and Ding Yi stepped down, the compassionate nun let out a sigh and reached out to give Zheng Gui a pulse, saying, "You have practiced the basic skills of our sect well. You can now learn swordsmanship. You have been a disciple for nearly a year, and I only passed on your Tuina Gong 6 months ago and your 7-star fist 4 months ago. Do you know what it means to be a disciple?" Zheng Gui shook his head. He came through the cycle of reincarnation and was not afraid of delaying time, so he was not in a hurry to learn the martial arts of the Hengshan sect. This peace and tranquility further satisfied Empress Dowager Cixin and strengthened his judgment that it was the reincarnation of a high monk. Nun Cixin said softly, "When you first came to the mountain, you suffered from constant hunger and did not open your muscles and bones, and your qi and blood were weak. Practicing martial arts recklessly not only made it difficult to start, but also hurt your body. So I asked you to take care of it for 4 or 5 months before teaching you the techniques of breathing and boxing to build a foundation. Now that you have a sense of qi, your muscles, bones, and meridians have also expanded, it is a good time to learn our fundamental martial arts." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Hengshan Sword Technique. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Hengshan Sword Technique. The 5 Mountain Sword Sect is a loose alliance organization, which is divided into the East Mountain Mount Taishan Sect, the West Mountain Huashan Sect, the South Mountain Hengshan Sect, the Middle Mountain Songshan Sect and the North Mountain Hengshan Sect. The martial arts of these 5 sects have their own characteristics. The most brilliant and powerful martial arts are generally their own swordsmanship. Because of this characteristic, the 5 Mountain Sword Sect is called the 5 Mountain Sword Sect. The swordsmanship styles of the 5 sects are different, but when it comes to defense, Hengshan swordsmanship ranks first. Even if we look at the entire martial arts world, if we talk about the strictness of defense, Hengshan swordsmanship is only inferior to Wudong's Tai Chi swordsmanship. However, occasionally when attacking, it is still above Tai Chi swordsmanship, which means it is slightly inferior to Tai Chi swordsmanship. Zheng Gui's first time shuttling through the world of Shaoqian was when he walked through the wastewood and miscellaneous work of a novice. His desire to climb higher and further away was long gone, and he was looking forward to learning the Hengshan swordsmanship that he would soon learn. The room in the colorless temple was small and difficult to use. Empress Dowager Cixin took Zheng Gui to the courtyard and said, holding her sword, "The essence of our martial arts in the Hengshan sect is swordsmanship. The swordsmanship of the Hengshan sect is characterized by a round and dense shape, with each move containing a subtle and gentle power. When facing enemies, 9 out of 10 moves are often defensive, and only one move can take advantage of the weakness to launch a surprise attack. Although swordsmanship moves are different, the most prominent feature is that the moves are round and have endless meaning. Take a look." As soon as Empress Dowager Cixin spoke, she drew her sword and danced, using her sword technique from the moment she started using the pearl-throwing technique. Every time she changed her magic sword move, Empress Dowager Cixin would introduce it in a low voice, in order to make Zheng Gui see it clearly. A big blow to the head, cutting off 6 roots, respecting the precious scriptures. The 64 moves of Hengshan sword technique are the martial arts skills that Empress Dowager Cixin has been immersed in for decades. If she uses a fast sword, she can complete a set within 10 breaths. However, in order for Zheng Gui to see clearly, she used a stick of incense to complete it. How much did you remember? Zheng Gui's understanding and mind were just like that of a mediocre person. He pondered, "I've memorized 10 moves, but I'm afraid using them may lead to distortion." When Empress Dowager Cixin taught Zheng Gui the introductory martial arts, she knew that although her disciple who closed the door was a reincarnation of great virtue with a clear Buddha nature and superior Buddhism, her martial arts skills were ordinary and far inferior to those of geniuses, even compared to the 3 nirvans of Dingjing. However, the value of martial arts practice lies more in persistence and the cultivation of the right path. Therefore, compassion is not discouraged by Zheng Gui's understanding of martial arts, and even geniuses are not discouraged. Instead, they teach Zheng Gui's Hengshan sword techniques more carefully. Empress Dowager Cixin practiced 3 times before handing the sword to Zheng Gui, teaching him every move. With the careful guidance of the compassionate abbess, Zheng Gui could complete a set of Hengshan sword techniques in 2 hours, but it was still somewhat rigid and required long-term practice. Nun Cixin's face turned waxen yellow, indicating that she was very tired. She gasped slightly and said, "You go down and practice well. I just told your 3 senior sisters that in the future, they will teach you our mental and sword techniques and palm techniques." Zheng Gui knew that Empress Dowager Cixin's martial arts were already top-notch in the martial arts world. However, because she supported her family in her youth and consumed a lot of effort, she often had hidden illnesses accompanying her when she was old and weak. Even using martial arts to heal her injuries was difficult to eradicate and cure. More than 50 years ago, the Hengshan sect suffered heavy losses when it participated in the battle of the 10 demon sect elders attacking Huashan Mountain. The elite disciples of the Hengshan sect lost almost 80% of their lives. The kind elder was still young and could not go. However, due to the excessive casualties of the teachers, many profound martial arts of our sect were lost. The kind teacher spent many hard work with the sisters at that time to avoid the defeat of the Hengshan sect, and was also injured. Thinking of his mentor's past, Zheng Gui was filled with admiration and said, "Master, please rest well and don't work hard anymore." Empress Dowager Cixin nodded and turned back to her ear room to rest. Zheng Gui then went to the scripture hall to exchange a few Buddhist scriptures, and then took the accompanying sword given by her mentor back to the tile house in Fengshi to study the Hengshan sword technique. The martial arts of the Hengshan sect mainly focus on defense and lack killing energy, but they are rigorous and orderly, with a very solid foundation for cultivation. Although the martial arts of the Hengshan sect include swordsmanship and palm techniques, the core martial arts are the internal skills of the Hengshan heart technique and the Hengshan sword technique, which are the two fundamental martial arts. Although the other Wanhua sword techniques are more advanced, and the Tianchong palm technique is also considered the top martial arts of our sect, the techniques used are all internal skills of the Hengshan heart technique, and the sword intent is also a continuation of the 64-style Hengshan sword technique. So it can be said that only by practicing the internal skills of Hengshan heart technique and Hengshan sword technique can one truly practice Hengshan martial arts. Zheng Gui knew that Empress Dowager Cixin should have wanted to personally teach her internal skills, heart technique, and sword technique. However, her energy was not strong, and she could not hold on even after struggling to teach the sword technique. Feeling grateful for his mentor's kindness in his heart, Zheng Gui returned to his residence in Fengxi and casually ate some dry food before starting to practice swordsmanship. He waited until noon when his clothes were soaked before taking his sword and adjusting his breath. He smiled and said, "I can already proficiently use the 64-style Hengshan swordsmanship, but I have not yet experienced the meaning of the sword, and there have been no changes in the moves. Although it will take years and months of hard work, I have finally memorized it, and it is not in vain for my mentor to teach me." At this moment it was almost dusk, and the afterglow from the sky cast a bright red glow over the peak of Jianxing. Zheng Gui watched as the golden sea of clouds rolled in front of Jianxing Peak, and his chest suddenly became full of courage. He moaned, "The clouds are so green that they desire rain. The water is so pure that it produces smoke. The vast expanse of the blue and dark is bottomless. The sun and moon shine on the gold and silver platforms. The neon is dressed in clothes, the wind is a horse. The kings of the clouds are coming down one after another." After howling for a while, Zheng Gui exclaimed in pleasure. As soon as he turned around, he saw a young nun standing behind him. "Hello, senior uncle. I am Iha, and my master is Abbess Dingy. My master has ordered me to come and ask senior uncle to come to Baiyun Temple tomorrow morning to listen to the Hengshan heart technique." Zheng Gui knew that Ding Jing and Ding Leisure might have left for Mount Taishan mountain. Only the third elder martial sister Ding Yi was in charge of the Baiyun Temple. Shifu could not pass on his kung fu to him anymore. His Hengshan mental skill and sword skill also fell to the third elder martial sister. "Thank you very much, Yi and my nephew. Could you please convey to senior sister Dingy that I will be going before tomorrow morning?" Yi and he turned around and left behind with 10 bows. Zheng Gui saw that his nephew was so indifferent, and he knew in his heart that she was 2 or 3 years older than him. He was probably not convinced by his young martial uncle. With a silent smile, Zheng Gui returned to his room. At that moment, there was already a food box in the room, which was sent by the servant of the colorless temple who served the kind-hearted abbess. Zheng Gui opened it and saw a bowl of plain noodles and 2 pieces of tofu. He immediately sat down and started eating. After finishing eating and washing the dishes, Zheng Gui carefully washed his hands and face with water before meditating on the bed to practice breathing skills and bear shaking strength. It wasn't until late at night that Zheng Gui finally came out and stretched lazily, his bones cracking all over, and then he lay down to rest. Zheng Gui's intelligence is average, and practicing Hengshan martial arts cannot be quickly mastered like a genius like Ling Huchong. However, fortunately, he has practiced Xiong Yao Jin, the basic external skill of the great Xiong Zen Academy, and his body and bones have become stronger. His mastery of sword movements is even better than that of ordinary people. Before going to bed, Zheng Gui pondered for a moment and realized that his speed in practicing swordsmanship and martial arts was not as fast as that of a genius. However, as long as he cooperated with the practice of Xiong Shake Force, his muscles and bones were strong, and his strength increased, he would definitely be able to achieve the same level of external skills as the martial monks in Shaolin Temple. In the future, even if his internal strength was insufficient, his power would be greatly enhanced under the stacked chi force, which may not be much worse than those geniuses. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Hengshan Mind Method. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 9. Master's Ceremony. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Master's Ceremony. After a stick of incense, Zheng Gui, who had changed into a clean moonlight white monk robe, saw the returning senior sister Ding Jing and the head senior sister Ding Xian in the colorless temple. It seems that the compassionate nun has aged a bit again in a few months, and the wrinkles on her face have become even deeper. At this time, it was already summer, but the weather on the mountain was still cooler. Zheng Gui only wore a black linen monk robe, while the kind-hearted abbess was still wearing a cotton-padded spring outfit. Sitting on the soft stool, she drooped her eyelids and said, "You must be the leader. Tell us about the 5 mountains meeting of Mount Taishan sun-watching peak. Calm down and tell the story of his Mount Taishan and his party without thinking." The Mount Taishan sun-watching peak meeting was a meeting that Mount Taishan sect strongly promoted in order to win the position of the leader of the 5 mountains. So when they arrived at Mount Taishan at leisure, they saw lights and decorations everywhere in Mount Taishan, and hundreds of disciples wore new clothes, as if they had already become the leader of the alliance. The South Mountain Hengshan sect and the North Mountain Hengshan sect made the same choice. The old leader of the Hengshan sect was also passed on to the eldest disciple, Emoda. Then Emoda and 3 disciples, Lu Yenrong, went to Mount Taishan to attend the meeting. Judging by their posture, they knew that the Hengshan sect would also unintentionally compete for the position of alliance leader. The Song Mountain sect was led by Zhuo Lingchan, the leader of the most popular orthodox sect in recent years, who led a team to Mount Taishan with 10 disciples and dozens of disciples. Although Hua Shan was the former leader of the alliance, he suffered a heavy defeat in the battle for sword power, and the elders of the sect lost their lives. The leader was also said to be seriously injured. Obviously, he knew that he could not keep the name of the leader, so it was just the first disciple Yu Buchuan and his fiancée, and the same junior sister Ning Zhongzi who came to Mount Taishan. The Huashan sect, the Hengshan sect and the Hengshan sect obviously had no intention of competing for the alliance leader, but Mount Song and Mount Taishan were determined to compete, so it was not long before the Mount Taishan sect and Mount Song sect began to tit for tat at the sun-watching summit. People in the Wulin always resolved disputes through martial arts competitions. Zhuo Lingchen immediately jumped into the arena to challenge Mount Taishan sect. The eldest disciple of Mount Taishan sect, Taoist priest Tian Men, is the first master of the new generation. He only lost after 50 moves of Zhuo Lingchen's sword. Yu Puzi, the leader of Mount Taishan sect, marveled at Zhuo Lingchen's superb martial arts. He fought with Zhuo Lingchen for more than 100 moves, and was finally hit by Zhuo Lingchen's big Songyang palm on the left shoulder. Mount Taishan sect bowed to the defeat, and the other 3 sects did not fight for the leader of the alliance. Zhuo Lingchen, the leader of Songshan sect, naturally became the new leader of the 5 Mountains sect by virtue of the conference, and at the same time, the 5 Mountains sword sect re-established the rule of solidarity in mutual watch. After changing the leader of the 5 Mountains sword sect, it changed the depression of the Huashan sect after its downfall. Zhuo Lingshan was originally an ambitious and capable hero, and he was clearly well prepared. After becoming the leader of the alliance, he issued more than 10 orders to reform many of the shortcomings of the 5 Mountains sword sect, while representing the 5 Mountains sword sect to lead the Songshan sect to fight against the demon sect to the end. Zhuo Lingchen's boldness and skill convinced the 4 major sects, and even the Mount Taishan sect no longer had complaints. After listening to Ding Xian's introduction, Nun Cixin nodded lightly and smiled, saying, "Ding Xian speaks highly of the left alliance leader. It seems that he is indeed a hero. What do you think of Ding Jing?" After pondering for a moment, Ding Jing said, "The leader of the left alliance has outstanding martial arts skills and a broad mind. He is also a dragon and phoenix among people. I'm afraid we can't find anyone more suitable than him in our 5 sacred sword sect." Empress Dowager Cixin sighed lightly and said, Zhuolengshan's martial arts were already the top of the Songshan sect more than 10 years ago, and now he is indeed a skilled practitioner of the Orthodox Church. He is young and energetic, and as the leader of the alliance, he naturally wants to achieve some results. However, the leader of the demon sect, Ren Wuxing, is not a kind person. If they meet, I don't think it's necessarily a blessing in the martial arts world. After sighing a few words, the compassionate nun said, I have looked at the calendar and next month's 18th is a good day. We will hold the sect leader's ceremony for you on that day. You and Ding Yi will handle this matter. Shaolin, Wudong, and our 5 sacred sword sect will all send capable disciples to personally deliver the message. There are also Beggars sect, Kunlun sect, Kongtong sect, Ame sect, and Yunnan Diansang sect, and we cannot neglect them. Whether they come or not, our etiquette will come. There are also Miaoxiang Temple in Jinan, Baiyi Temple in Suzhou, Xiaoya Temple in Mount Wutai, Huigua Temple in Taiyuan, Shanjian Temple in Kaifeng, Qingjing Temple in Laohiku, and Ganlu Temple in Yuzhou. Some of these dozens of temples and temples are from our Hengshan lower courtyard, while others are fellow Buddhists. They also need to fly pigeons to convey messages, inviting them to come and pay their respects to the new leader. Ding Jing nodded and said, Master, don't worry, I'll send someone to handle it right away. Ding Xian asked, Master, what do I want to do? Nun Cixin moved her prayer beads and said, You can practice in seclusion for more than a month. The successors to the throne ceremony are all famous martial artists and senior experts from the martial arts world. We must not fall under the name of our Hengshan sect. After Ding Xian agreed in a low voice, he saw that his mentor had already closed his eyes and recited the scriptures. He glanced at Ding Jing, Ding Yi, and Zheng Gui, and the 4 of them slowly retreated. In the blink of an eye, it was April 18th, because the Hengshan sect was all female relatives. Although the 5 sacred sword sect and many martial arts disciples arrived at Hengshan early, they all lived at the foot of the mountain and only climbed the mountain in the early morning of the 18th. This day is a great celebration of the Hengshan sect. Most of the lay disciples of our sect returned more than 10 days early. Even the abbot of the lower courtyard temple came with his disciples. At this time, both the Baiyun temple and the colorless temple in Hengshan were repainted. Although there were no lanterns or decorations because they were outside, each nun wore new clothes, and the disciples of the secular family wore slightly more vibrant and colorful clothes. In these days, Zheng Gui began to practice martial arts and read Buddhist scriptures as usual. After April 10th, he was also forced to become a strong man by Ding Jing, saying that they couldn't pull themselves away. Zheng Gui had a respected identity and was most suitable for receiving the head of our lower courtyard and fellow nuns. Therefore, Zheng Gui had to sit in the Baiyun temple every day to receive nuns of all sizes, eat tea, and discuss scriptures. A few days ago, Zheng Gui was a bit fresh and okay, but in the last few days, he became even more silent. Fortunately, all the nuns knew that Master Qualitative Zen was a closed-door disciple of the old sect leader. Although he was young, he was proficient in Buddhism, and everyone respected him and dared not neglect him. It wasn't until the early morning of the 18th that Zheng Gui was considered liberated. He ate some dry food before dawn and changed into a brand new black monk robe. After attending morning classes, he sat in the Guanyin hall of Baiyun Temple and waited. After a while, I heard the disciples' message. Master Martial Uncle, Mount Taishan sent Yujizi, Taoist priest Tianmen and Taoist priest Tiansong to lead their disciples here. Ding Xian and Ding Jing, Ding Yi and Zheng Gui got up after hearing the words, and Ding Xian smiled and said, Master Yujizi and senior brother Tianmen are both important figures of Mount Taishan sect. Junior sisters and younger brothers come with me to meet them. The 4 of them were about to lead their disciples out of the hall when another disciple sent a message. Mr. Mo from Hengshan sent his disciples to congratulate him. Mr. Jianyu, a gentleman from the Huashan sect, and Lady Ning came to congratulate. The Left Alliance leader of Songshan brings his disciples to congratulate. Abbess Dingy said, "It seems they came together." Ding Jing said, "Let's welcome back together so we don't have to rush back and forth." As everyone spoke, they walked out of Baiyun Temple and saw 4 groups of people standing outside the door. The people in the center and on the far right are the most. They are wearing turquoise robes and blue Taoist robes. It is the Song Mountain sect and the Mount Taishan sect. The leaders of the 2 sects are Zhuo, a middle-aged man with a beautiful beard, and the other is an old Taoist in his 50s and a red-faced Taoist in his 30s. They are Yujizi and Tianmen Taoist. On the left are a skinny man wearing a red shirt and carrying a huqin, as well as 2 young men. The 3 of them are dressed in shabby clothes and have a lewd temperament. Although they are the disciples of the head of the Hengshan sect, Moda, and his personal disciples, they appear to have the weakest aura. Next to the 3 members of the Hengshan sect is a white-clad Confucian scholar in his 30s, with a jade-like face and neat hair. Beside him is a handsome woman in her 20s and 30s. Zheng Gui didn't need to be introduced by his senior sister. He recognized the leaders of the 4 sects at a glance, especially Yu Buchuan and Ning Zhongzi, who represented the Huashan sect. He couldn't help but take 2 more glances and thought to himself, Yu Buchuan is known as the gentleman's sword, and indeed looks like a humble gentleman. His appearance and demeanor make people feel friendly when they see him. Unfortunately. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Silence. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Silence. Unfortunately, Zheng Gui and other outstanding figures like Yu Buchuan ultimately became pitiful and despicable villains due to their fate. He thought of Ling Huchong, the eldest disciple of Yu Buchuan, and shook his head secretly in his heart. An orphan, the leader embryo who was personally cultivated and raised by his master and mother, did not stand firm in the face of root problems and the rise and fall of the sect, and lacked a sense of responsibility and career. Not only did he not help the already endangered Huashan sect, but he also dragged down the sect. Although this made Huchong's heart not bad, it was difficult for him to become a responsible person. Zheng Gui believed that if Ling Huchong really had a master mentality and regarded the Huashan sect as his home, he should not keep it secret after witnessing the lost and advanced swordsmanship of his sect in the Sigua Cliff Grottos. After learning the Duga 9 swords, he should not hide it. If even the closest master and mother in the world were kept hidden, then Ling Huchong's so-called temperament was just a child's play. Zheng Gui also believed that if Ling Huchong firmly stood on the side of Yu Buchuan and relied on his learning of Duga Jiujian's strength, even if the Huashan sect could not become the leader of the 5 Sacred Mountains Alliance again and merge the 5 sects, it would be completely effortless to maintain independence and even expand the sect. If we could expand our school through the joint efforts of our master and disciple, Yu Buchuan is unlikely to become a eunuch and tear apart the mask of a hypocrite. Human nature is complex and ever-changing. Zheng Gui felt that if he put himself in the shoes of others, Yu Buchuan's tragedy may not necessarily be forced into helplessness. Compared to left cold Zen, Zheng Gui is not averse to Yu Buchuan. Instead, he secretly feels that if he wants to prevent left cold Zen from merging with the 5 Sacred Sword sect in the future, the brainless Tianmen Taoist doesn't need to pay attention to it. Even the Hengshan sect cannot fully control it, and it doesn't need to be taken seriously. Only the thoughtful Yu Buchuan can serve as an ally and helper. Ding Xian stepped forward to pay his respects to the leaders, and then introduced Ding Yishe and Zheng Gui to them. After exchanging greetings for a moment, everyone entered the Baiyun temple together. Abbess Ding Jing saluted Left Cold Zen and explained, "Left Alliance leader, my master has been ill recently and has not recovered. She cannot attend this grand ceremony. She asked me to apologize on her behalf for not being able to greet you. Please forgive me." At this moment, Zhuo had just become the leader of the alliance. It was not yet 20 years before he planned to annex the 5 Mountains sect and suppress the dominance of Shaolin and Wudang. Upon hearing this, Zhuo bowed back and said, "Empress Dowager Cixin, she is a senior uncle of Zhuo. Is there any reason for her to welcome me? I should visit her." Zhuolengshan's politeness made everyone feel a little at ease. They felt that having such an expert as the leader of the alliance was also considered a blessing for the Five Sacred Sword sect. After everyone got to know each other, they sat down and started talking. Suddenly, two ordinary female disciples of the Hengshan sect came in and shouted, "Master, the deputy leader of the Beggars sect, Zhang Gui, and the Kunlun sect, Jiansang sect, Kongtong sect, Jindao sect, and other sects have all come to congratulate you." Shaolin Master Fang Ji, representing Master Fang Zheng, came here. Wudang sect Taoist Qingshu also brought a few Taoist leaders. Ding leisurely smiled and said, "Old Master Fang Ji is the head of Shaolin Luohan Hall. Taoist priest Qingshu is also a senior. Younger martial brothers and younger martial sisters follow me to meet them in person." Suo Lengchen said. "Shaolin Wudang is the great power in the Wulin today. Two seniors came to congratulate us. Although it is a happy event of the Hengshan sect, it is also the glory of our Five Mountain Sword sect. We should go together to greet it." Lu Bai, Lu Ho, and others from the Songshan sect all agreed in unison, while the intellectual figures of the other sects nodded and said yes. So everyone went out together to welcome the distinguished guests from Shaolin, Wudang, Beggars sect, Kunlun, and other sections. After everyone arrived at the Baiyun temple, which was several times larger than the colorless temple, also appeared a bit cramped. In the blink of an eye, it was noon, and as the auspicious time was approaching, Ding Jing, who was responsible for arranging the succession ceremony of the sect leader, stood up and said, "Sect leader, alliance leader, the auspicious time is approaching. Should we proceed with the ceremony?" Zhuolengshan had just taken office as the leader of the alliance, and the foundation of the masses was still weak, so he naturally dared not compete with others. He smiled and said, "Abbess Dingxian, we are just waiting to taste our Hengshan vegetarian food." Dingxian smiled and stood up, saying, "Then let me apologize." As she spoke, she looked at Dingyi and Zheng Gui and said, "Dingyi junior sister and Qualitative junior brother, don't neglect your esteemed guests." Dingyi and Zheng Gui agreed, and Dingxian and Dingjing saluted the crowd before turning around and slowly leaving. After a quarter of an hour, Ding Yi was talking to Left Cold Zen and Wudang Qingshu Taoist about the recent movements of the demon sect. Suddenly, he heard a few bells and drums ringing, and knew that the ceremony was about to begin. So he remained silent and looked outside the door. Although Baiyun Temple is not as large as Shaolin Temple, it is also a sparrow with all 5 organs. Although there were no bell towers or drum towers, there were also 2 bell and drum pavilions. The morning and evening drums are also the daily lives of Buddhist disciples. At this time, more than 10 fearless bell and drum sounds were heard, and dozens of nun disciples in front of Guanyin Hall began to sing the Guanyin Bodhisattva heart mantra, and slowly entered the hall. A good man, if there are countless beings of billions and billions, suffering from various afflictions, and hearing that he is Guanyin Bodhisattva, he is named with all his heart Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva, upon observing her sound, is liberated. Accompanied by the solemn sound, dozens of female disciples from Mount Hengshan rushed in with guards from left to right. Among the 2 groups of disciples were Ding Jing, dressed in a robe and a monk's hat, and Ding Xian, dressed in a robe. In front of the statue of Guanyin, everyone bowed and worshipped, and at this moment, the leaders of various schools of Guanli also stood up and remained silent. After worshipping Guanyin, a disciple came to the table with a rusted white thread on a black velvet cloth and a Hengshan pattern. On the table was the ranking of the ancestors of the Hengshan sect, with the highest one in the center being the founder of the Chuang sect, Abbess Xiaofeng. Ding Jing, on behalf of her mentor and compassionate abbess, passed down the short sword, prayer beads, wooden fish, and Buddhist scriptures from the 4 treasures of the sect to Ding Xian one by one. Ding Xian worshipped and then took over, and then the disciples of Hengshan paid their respects to the sect leader. From then on, the ceremony of Ding Xian taking over as the sect leader of Hengshan was considered a complete ceremony. Zhuoleng Chan, Master Qingshu, Master Fangji, Zhang Jinao, and others all bowed their hands to congratulate him, and then said, "After I succeed, I will pay my respects and report to my mentor, Sister Taishan. Please take your seats for a moment and wait for the vegetarian banquet." After a few polite words from everyone, Ding Xian left the main hall and, under the care of his disciples, took off his robe. He quickly went to meet the master of Xingfeng Temple and paid his respects to his mentor, the compassionate abbess. Recently, as the Empress Dowager Cixin has grown older, her martial arts skills have severely declined, and she has been plagued by multiple illnesses that are difficult to heal. She knows that her deadline is approaching, so she is eager to pass on the throne. At the same time, she does not want her orthodox colleagues to see her illness and underestimate Mount Hengshan, which is why she does not host the transmission ceremony. After Ding Xian kowtowed several times in the dim and cramped room, Nun Cixin sat up and nodded with a smile, saying, "Since the Battle of Huashan by the 10 elders of the demon sect in World War II 50 years ago, the demon sect has been depressed for decades, but my 5 mountain sword sect has also suffered a great loss of vitality and has long lost its former glory. Our superior martial arts have lost a lot in my generation. Fortunately, your sisters have good aptitude and talents, and they have already been my true disciples. Now that you are in charge of our sect, as a teacher, I only hope that you can work together with Dingjing, Dingyi, and Qualitative to promote and develop our Hengshan sect. This can be considered worthy of our ancestors throughout history." Ding Xian listened to his mentor's instructions, his eyes slightly red, and he kowtowed, "I must remember my master's teachings and work together with senior sisters and junior brothers to promote and develop our Hengshan sect." The compassionate nun smiled at the corner of her mouth and said, "That's good. I can't bear to think about it. My heart is bright. There is no life, no destruction, no dust." As soon as she finished speaking, the kind-hearted abbess sat down and left. Ding Xian looked up and saw her mentor sitting down, feeling unbearable grief and crying on the ground. After the succession ceremony of the leader of the Hengshan sect, the compassionate abbess of the old leader passed away. After this news reached Baiyun Temple, it immediately caused a sensation. The disciples of the Hengshan sect all went to see Xingfeng, and the elders of the heads of other sects also went to the colorless temple to offer condolences. The funeral of the monks was kept simple. After the monks of our sect, led by Zen Master Fang Ji from Mount Hengshan and Shaolin Temple, recited scriptures and passed away, the body of the compassionate nun was cremated, and the ashes of the relics were buried in the Tower Forest on the back mountain. End of this chapter.